I'm going to introduce everybody. Like I said, they're going to come up one by one, exactly 10 minutes, and then we will descend into the Q&A. The first one is, as you see here, the Access Audit Toolkit. It will be by John and where we got Tim, because you have three. They will be first. The second one will be Improved Collection Analysis, and that will be by Meredith. Meredith, yes. The one will be Harnessing Airtable for library collection strategies, and that will be Emil? Emily. Okay, thank you. And she's third. And the fourth one is No End in Sight, a serials review process that works, and that will be Carrie. And also you had three, and that's Anna for the second one. So they will be coming up in that order, and make sure you get your questions. Thank you for participating.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for attending on these waning moments of the conference. I trust everybody's hanging in there. My name is John Feltz, and I'm the head of collections and technology at Coastal Carolina University. So before we get into the specifics of the Audit Toolkit, I thought I'd add a little bit of context and explore why simple, user-friendly access is important to our users. I'll trust that everybody is well immersed and familiar with the code of conduct and the accessibility guidelines. So I'll go right in. First and foremost, access is important because our users' expectations. Most of our patrons grew up with the internet, and being online is very natural to them. And the majority of their online experiences occur on the consumer web, where they are used to being able to quickly and easily access the information they want in a very seamless fashion. We know for a fact that a poor access experience deters library users, gives them a bad first impression or lingering impression, and it likely encourages the use of unsecure pirate sites like Sci-Hub and the like. Probably has, well, I'm sure has implications on research integrity, as well as the usage data that libraries use to make and inform our collection decisions. So when access is disrupted, it's a support burden, and it takes a lot of time and people power to remedy these. As an example, I have three of us in my shop that tend to these at Coastal Carolina, and before we migrated to federated access, we would field hundreds of these support requests an academic year. But when we did migrate from IP-based access to federated access, these work, and that integrates with our single sign-on environment, which gives a seamless, familiar user experience, then our support requests were cut by 75%. Well, there's challenges, obviously, with staying on top of access. I know everybody in this room already knows that. And there are numerous complicating factors, including the technology. I mean, there are multiple technologies for access, and you know, IP addresses and VPNs and proxy servers and federated access and ZIP2 protocol and referring URLs and the like. So that's a lot to keep track of just for libraries, much less our users. And then there's the regulatory environment as well. It's complicated and it changes frequently, all the legalities. You know, this includes GDPR and CCPA. And there's also changes in the browser technology that's currently occurring in the way that browsers do handle privacy as well, that we have to keep track of. So individually, these may not seem like a lot to keep track of, but when you at scale, it's particularly overwhelming for librarians. So we just don't have a lot of mental bandwidth that we can commit to consider usability, privacy, security, and reliability. So with that, and a segue, Tim will come up and we'll introduce this concept of an access audit toolkit.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. We have a terrifyingly small amount of time to cover this, so I'm going to talk fairly rapidly, sorry, and hopefully if you've got questions, come back to us. So my name is Tim Lloyd. I run a company called LibLinks, which does a lot of identity and access within our industry, but I'm here more because I am the co-chair of the Outreach Committee for Seamless Access, and I'm on the Governance Committee as well, and my colleague John is also a member of our committee, and we are a cross-industry initiative. So what is the Access Audit Toolkit? First, it's a framework for assessing the quality of your access experience. While much of this material already exists in various places across the internet, this toolkit brings it together aligned around the issue of the user access experience. Secondly, it provides recommendations on best practices and other industry standards and other advice on how to deliver a more effective access experience. The aim here is to make it easy for you as librarians to, one, understand what industry best practices are, and two, have clear documentation on steps to take when your access experience falls short. Three, it's a communications tool to improve knowledge and awareness of these issues, both within the library as well as with key stakeholders in your organizations that sit outside the library. And finally, we hope this toolkit can help libraries to make a business case for investing and improving your access experience, whether that investment is staff time to contact vendors about improving delivery and or improving internal policies. Note, this is a fairly new proposal. It's a work in progress, so we're actively soliciting your input on ways to improve it. So let's dive straight into what are our recommendations. So the first one is about the usability of your access experience. Our first usability category is whether it's obvious how to access a paywalled resource. So for example, is the primary access option clearly distinguished from other options? Are there a maximum of 3 alternative access options with additional ones progressively disclosed? Our second usability category relates to selecting your organizational affiliation. Now, this isn't an issue for IP authenticated users, but many other types of organizational credentials require your users to identify their organizational affiliation, such as federated authentication or public library cards. So, for example, can you quickly filter the list, or does it allow for remembering your selected affiliation so you don't have to keep re-entering it? Our third usability requirement is accessibility, which I could devote a whole hour to easily. According to statistics from the US Centers for Disease Control, over 20% of your users will have at least one disability that can impair their ability to navigate web pages. Accessibility is not just technical compliance, it's about having considerate interactions. So, for example, can users navigate the access interface using their keyboard? Does it support non-English languages? Alongside each category are links to guidance we've created that provides more information on these issues specifically for libraries. And if someone can tell me how to upload these to Hoover, you'll be able to click on those links. See me afterwards. Privacy, next one. So our privacy audit categories are based on the American Library Association's Bill of Rights regarding privacy. First, what data is shared automatically without patron knowledge? So for example, what specific pieces of data are shared? How much of it is personally identifiable information? How is any shared data stored? Is any data shared with third parties? Next, what data is shared with vendors with patron permission? So for example, are patrons required to share personal information in order to access services? How is permission gained? And can patrons request deletion of their data? And lastly, what data is collected internally regarding patrons? This is within your organizations. For example, systems that can collect patron data like an ILS, a proxy server, a single sign-on, an LMS. And is patron consent required before you collect data? And at the bottom of this slide are some more resources we recommend if you want more library-specific guidance. So there's 2 more areas. So last year we presented on the first 2 areas, usability and privacy. We're now expanding it to cover security and reliability. So these are a work in progress. This is just a flavor of what we're working on. So the first category of questions covers what items need to be secured. So for example, what information is collected that needs securing? How sensitive is this data? Does your institution have a data classification framework or policy? Because not all data is the same. Are you collecting information that you don't need for this task? The second category of questions covers how security is assessed for the software systems and website used by library users. So for example, who can access the data? What can they do with it? Is that governed by technical restrictions or policy restrictions, or ideally both? Is your staff trained on security policy? And the third category will deal with the actions needed to detect and react to a breach. So for example, if patron credentials or usage data are compromised. And lastly, reliability. So the reliability of your access experience. The first category is about understanding what processes and systems in your library can cause access to be fragile. For example, a campus IP address is kept up to date and regularly communicated to vendors. The second category is to understand the impact on patrons of low reliability. So some users critically rely on the availability of library resources to support their work. Think practicing clinicians or maybe students relying on core textbooks for papers or exams. Other users may be more forgiving about the availability of access. And then our third category digs into this issue more deeply to explore whether reliability disproportionately impacts certain groups of patrons that actually rely more heavily on that access. So an example could be senior faculty who continue to rely on legacy access methods that can be less reliable, like proxy IPs, versus students who may be more comfortable using forms of single sign-on, such as federated authentication, that are less fragile. And with that, I'll hand back to John.
No pressure. So quickly, very quickly, can you envision a use case for this? Can you see the benefits of undertaking such tasks or of such an environment that we're proposing? Do you think it would be beneficial if this type of an interactive device was in a more digestible manner on a website similar to like Library Accessibility Alliance's site that's dynamic and interactive? So our proposal is for Seamless Access to continue building out the conceptual framework as we look for partners in the library community that have the personnel and the infrastructure available to develop, implement, and maintain such an environment. So these are the questions and consideration that Seamless Access is considering, and we'll look forward to having a conversation with you afterwards. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Meredith Taylor. I am the Collections Assessment and Data Analytics Librarian at Appalachian State University. So I'm here to talk to you today about how I've been using business intelligence software to improve some of our collections analyses and visualizations. First part of my talk will be kind of about BI software in general, and then I will show you their canned, but then some of the typical analyses that I've been able to, and visualizations I've been able to use. So why BI software? So our current ILS, which is Sierra, doesn't really provide any capability for analytics or visualization. And so we needed to find a product that could provide that kind of functionality. I will say we are going to migrate to Alma in July of this 2025 coming up. It seems to have more robust analytics capabilities. And so this might be something that, we abandon and we move to the Alma analytics that's set on top of an Oracle kind of BI software. But this is kind of what we needed to do in the meantime to be able to provide this functionality. But why did I need the BI software? I needed something that could handle large data sets, millions of rows, millions of cells of data. But I also really needed something that was going to be able to provide a lot of in-user custom, interactions, customizability, things like that. Because I would ask the collection selectors, what are the kind of questions they're trying to answer with around their assessment and things like that. People had a lot of different answers. Sometimes they didn't know exactly what they needed. So I really needed to be able to let them to be able to go in there and kind of analyze, do some quick analyzations and visualizations on their own. So primarily what I needed was to be able to serve up web-based dashboards with this information for them, let the end users or our selectors be able to really access the data and the variables and things that were most pertinent to them, since they all have different discipline areas, various focuses. And then also wanted them to be able to, again, get in there and customize some things for themselves. We're using this Tableau BI software. I don't know if some of you have heard that, of that. And why Tableau? Well, probably the most important thing was it was the BI software that was supported and used on campus. So your campus might use something else, but this was what was already available. And it met our needs, so we use this. And very important, if you ever are interested in BI software, typically you need a server to be able to serve up the dashboards. And so that server was already available. So that was very important. Again, met the capability and functionality that we needed. But I will say, if you're interested in kind of looking at this, trying to implement something like this, there's lots of other software, Microsoft Power BI, things like that, that can probably, if your campus uses it, should pretty much be able to replicate the kind of things that I'm showing you here in another BI software. Downsides and limitations of the BI software. So it is great. I've been able to really be able to do some great things, but be aware that some of the downsides are the cost for the software itself and the servers. We were able to just buy one kind of seat on the Tableau license. Being the library, it would have been obviously probably prohibitive if we were going in it alone. And I want to say, if you are interested in doing that, go to your institutional research folks. They are probably the folks who have the have any kind of BI software, and often they'll let you kind of just, piggyback on their licenses and their servers. So if you're interested, there is a learning curve. If you're not used to doing a lot of analyses, you'll have probably a little bit of a learning curve there, but also how to actually use the software. They're all very similar, but they do function differently. So there's definitely a learning curve. It's not something that you'll probably just be able to sit in front of and, on your first time, create the analyses and the visualizations that you're looking for. This one is a big thing for me. This is a kind of an area like I create the visualizations and analyses, but it's not the only thing I do. And so this is one of those softwares that for me, if I don't use it, I lose it. So trying to keep sometimes if I haven't been into the Tableau for a while, I have to kind of reorient myself. So that is one thing to keep in mind. So you have to really try to keep your skill set current, because otherwise you always have to kind of go back and kind of get yourself back up to speed. And one of the limitations of it is really these analyses and visualizations are only as good as your data sets. So as people, if anyone who works with data, if you've got dirty data, if you've got wonky data, you're going to have dirty analyses and wonky visualizations. So you still have to spend a lot of time often cleaning up your data. Sometimes you will spend more time cleaning up your data and getting it ready than you actually do going ahead and creating the analyses and the visualizations. As I mentioned data sets. So what data sets am I typically using in these things? I'm currently using a lot of the counter data sets. That's actually a pretty clean data set because obviously they're standardized. So that's helpful. I also create some internal data sets combining various pieces. So those are the ones that I'm mainly using in the BI software. But Tableau specifically does offer, you can pull in lots of other things other than just say a CSV file or an Excel spreadsheet. So they do have a lot of flexibility if you do have other file types that you would want to use. So this is my last slide before I show you some of the things that I've actually created. But so if you're wondering, so how did I get from point A to point B when I start showing you these things? So the systems and software I'm using, one is, again, mentioned counter reports. So your typical PR, DRs, TRs, those kinds of things. Now, we use EBSCO consolidation, usage consolidation, which is helpful because it does do some deduping, some things like that. But you don't have to have that. You can always just sushi harvest those counter reports and union them and things like that. There's a corollary product to, Tableau has a couple different products. One of them is Prep, which is very helpful. That's where what I use to clean data, do joins, do unions, things like that. You don't have to have Prep, but it makes it much easier if you can do a lot of that data cleanup and things in Prep and then move it into the next thing that's on the list, which is the Tableau desktop, which is where you actually create the analyses and the visualizations. And then, as I mentioned, you have to have a Tableau server to be able to post the dashboard for people to interact with. Otherwise, you have to use a Tableau public server, which is literally public, like everybody in the world can see it. So for most of us, especially when you're looking at your usage data or your cost per usage data, you probably don't want to share that with the world. So you need to have a local server of some option to be able to post these. So I know in the back these are going to be really hard to see, and I apologize for that. But this is kind of a picture. So these are some of the various visualizations and analyses I typically do. This is just a fairly simple crosstab when you're looking at it. But the important thing to know is all those filters on the right are where people really get in there and customize it. So you can't see, but you can search by, so this is actually a TRJ3 file, but you can go in there and you can filter and customize by the titles of your journals, by your platform. So if you just wanted to look at EBSCO titles, you can, pull out all your other various platforms. You can filter by years. You can have all the years, you can have just focus. So you can basically take this and then keep, kind of filtering it down and down if you need to. It also has all the metrics, the counter metrics that would be available in that report. And then this is actually one that is, if you're familiar with this report, looks at OA gold and open, just kind of controlled. So you can control that. So that's a very helpful one. This is one that kind of represents a trend analysis. So this is for this is a PR P1 a report that's underlying this, but you can control it, for trend analysis. So again, you can change up your years, your metric types, but you can focus in and start to see, how the various things are going over time. So that's a good trend analysis with this line graph. You can run relationships between two variables. This is really hard to see, but basically what I've got is CPU on one axis, and then I've got on the x-axis, I've got priority. Now, priority is a local variable, so we have our collection folks say whether the priority for that option is going to be high, medium, or low. So this is a cross of those two things. So the value of this is you can start looking, well, if it's a low priority and a high CPU, those are probably the ones you want to be looking at. So visually, you can go in there and click on each one of those dots, and it gives you the data for it. You can drill down through filtering, so you can put multiple databases dashboards together. So this top is actually platform use. So you can start with that, but then if your users want to drill down into one of those platforms, like ACM Digital Library, then if they click on that, the bottom is what pops into your dashboard, and that's just the journal titles in ACM. So you can kind of make it very easy for your users to be able to kind of start drilling down through the data. And the last one here is a story functionality that they provide. So basically, you can use those dashboards, but up in that gray, which no one's going to be able to read what it says, even in the front row, but you can add text to give context. So you can put the dashboards, but you can draw people's attention or pull out salient features. And then you can use, it's called a story functionality. So you can take people through the story of the data by overlaying kind of interpretation on top of the dashboards. That's it. So, there you go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Menzel. I'm the collections librarian at Duke University's Law School Library, Goodson. And I'm going to be talking a bit about using, somewhat Airtable, but really talking about documenting collection decisions and using a particular workflow for documenting collection strategies. You know the code of conduct now. All right, so our goal here is I'm going to talk a bit about library context, discuss the need for the tool and some use cases that it was developed around, some features of the tool, and next steps that we're looking at. And the goal here is to really not so much highlight the tool as share an approach to storing and connecting collection development decisions. So I'm at the law school. We operate independently from the main campus library. We're a team of 22, and that really allows us quite a bit of flexibility in how we're changing our workflows. It adjusts how we're documenting our decisions. We share an ILS with the main campus, but have our own documentation system, acquisitions librarian, reference team, things like that. I came to the library about 2 years ago in a new librarian position. So I'm the collections management and strategies librarian. And before that, we had really there wasn't really a designated collection selection step. We had a selection of our reference team worked with making selection decisions, but then often that would get handed very quickly to acquisitions, or, that line was kind of blurry. So part of this was emphasizing the creation of a designated selection step and adjusting our workflows to include more documentation about why are we making decisions, who's making these decisions, we said we did this, but did we actually do it? Or we made a decision here and then weren't able to, maybe the vendor was funny or some different things happen. Another important context here is that when this tool was developed, we were working in Aleph, and we are now in Alma as of maybe 2-3 months ago. And Alma has a couple different tools, and I'll talk about that a bit more. But a lot of this functionality was created to support gaps in Aleph's capabilities around, it doesn't really have much in the way of project management, Our documentation was really strong once we acquired a resource, but not really before. If we didn't end up buying the resource, then there might be some information in emails or a buried Word doc or a wiki file or 5 other places. And it's not that the information didn't exist, but it was a little in many places. So here are the questions I was thinking about. I was often asked to find information about why was a decision made about a given resource. So this might be a resource that we did not end up getting. Why did we end up not getting it? And who requested it? And just, it didn't need to be elaborate, but we needed to have some context of what was our previous work with this vendor. And if we didn't end up acquiring the resource, it was really rather difficult to find any information on that. So we needed more decision documentation. I was thinking about where are we in the collection process for a given resource? What's the next step? So one, identifying the workflows, and this was part of me being new to the library. The previous, the person who had been in the acquisitions role had been there for 20 years and knew things like the back of her hand, but things weren't necessarily as much written down. And so part of it was identifying what's the process, needing a project management tool for collection decisions. I was wondering, can you find the original request details for a given purchase request? So we were getting single purchase requests in from the ILL inbox, from the circulation inbox, from the reference librarian stopping by at the desk, from someone coming by to my office. And we had, how things happen in libraries is it's all sort of intersecting. But we really needed a funnel point. I was often asked, can you send me the details about this resource once we had decided to acquire it, or the cataloger needed information, or for sending it out to the reference team, needed distribution information. And kind of the subset of information for each of those was, there's overlap, but it's not exactly the same. And so I was often finding that there was a lot of redundancy and I'm going to go back to my email. I'm going to try to search and find and pull this up and send I'm going to paraphrase it. And then, a lot of kind of, it felt like a lot of wasted time or repeated efforts. Just general, again, project management. Did there's a lot of different processes going on. And did you remember to do all of them? So finding process overlaps became a big tool in that. And then do you have any data on trends in our collection decisions? And we really did not. We had, again, documentation somewhat, but it was, as Meredith discussed, you can have the data, but if it's not cleaned, if it's not organized, it doesn't do you a lot of good. So part of this process was putting the data into, a data language, making the intake process for these requests actually quantifiable. Okay, so we did a couple things. I created an intake form. So we had one intake point. We could track all our requests, ostensibly improving our turnaround time, or at least even being able to know what our turnaround time was for these sorts of processes. And it included details on who was the requester, which wasn't necessarily who was sending the email. The notification requests. So when the resource arrives, who wants to be notified? Who should we send the hold to? Things like that. It also improved that when acquisitions was receiving the information, then they knew it had been verified by the selectors. It had already been approved for purchase. And it also included all the necessary bibliographic information. So they weren't trying to, did you want this in ebook? Did you want this in print? Is it okay? Do you have a strong preference? How quickly do you need it? Things like that. I created a interface in Airtable, and a big part of this was so that I could change the information, so all the data is stored in the back end. It's all in one place, but I could change views of who was seeing what at different points in time. So when a request form was submitted, I automated these processes. So the selection librarian, or often that was me, would receive an email with relevant information, and then I could pull up in the dashboard, okay, what are the pending tasks I have? I need to review these purchase requests for a single item, for a large resource. This one's in a trial. And I could pull up information on the resource. So you have here, you'll see the request status, which is where it is in the process. You mark the selection decision, and you have the specific request type, which you can think of as different kind of tracks for information. And that was an important part of this process also, was identifying the different request types that were relevant for us. And really, if you're going to be programming it on the back end, it really requires you to pin down, okay, when X happens, you do this. If this happens, then you do. It makes the process need to be very linear in some ways, and you can skip steps, but you need to know what the steps are. It included a spot for notes. So the requester note would be what the person who submitted the purchase request had included. In this case, they're saying either addition would be fine, and thanks for doing this. I might include a selection note if I need to pass it along to another group of people for further review. So that might be something like, hey, this is already in our collection, but they want a print copy. Are we adjusting our policy for this type of decision? It might include an order note, which would go to the catalogers, to the people that were actually purchasing the item. And so I could control what information was going to whom. And because sometimes that overlap would get a little confusing. If the acquisitions librarian doesn't necessarily need to see everything that the requester is sending over. So I'm going to hurry along here. You have bibliographic information. You can update the status. Let's see. And then this is a different view. So this is for acquisitions. And you'll notice that different fields are editable, and not everything is shown in this view. So the collections view is kind of my management view, and I can have a full perspective. But something I like about Airtable is that you're able to adjust what is shown, what's editable. We automated when people were notified, things like that. So for example, this is the selector view, and it gives them an instructions on, hey, we need you to make a final decision on this. In this case, it's, are we going to bind this material or not? They adjust the next step. They make a decision, put their name in. We can also share information about trials that are going on, things like access details. And you'll see here, this isn't editable, but we can embed this on our wiki page so that the reference librarians can view this when they're reviewing the trial, but they don't necessarily need to have access to Airtable at all. They don't need Airtable accounts. They can just view it. Okay, so as I mentioned, part of the process was identifying these different steps and kind of creating this this linear trail. And so on the back end, just quickly, you'll see that so something like selection review or trial, okay, that they're like different functions. All right. And then with Alma, we're transitioning over into to moving these functions into work orders, thinking about ILS versus collection development interface. Happy to talk about that more after. All right, thank you.
Hello, I'm Carrie Ludovico. I'm the business librarian at the University of Richmond. I'm joined today with my colleague Anna Creech, who is our head of acquisitions. She's had many titles over the years, so I'm finally learning her right title. And we're joined in spirit by Carol Wittig, who is our head of research and instruction. She's the queen of collections at the front end. So we're going to talk about our journals review process that we've been going through for the past 6 years or more. You've seen the code of conduct. All right. So 5-6 years ago, we had rumors that we were going to have a renovation of our B1 floor approaching. And since that time, we are also now going to move into a further renovation. So this process has been something that we've been working on for a while, but it's been a good benefit to us in the long term, not just for our space, but also for how we look at our serials, how we make decisions, and how we record those decisions. So we wanted to ensure that our collection of bound journals, which were housed on our B2 level, we were consolidating all of our collections from the B1 and B2 level down onto B2, so we needed to make space. The easy low-hanging fruit was the bound journals, which are not really in great use at our small undergraduate liberal arts institution. So we use the same criteria we do for weeding our print collection, which is one of my duties. And we wanted to develop a lean collection of relevant materials that our users used. And we also wanted to increase access to these titles. They are not flying off the shelves. So we wanted to make sure that what we had was usable and that we could increase our access. In the 5 years, we weeded more than 50,000 bound journals. We did that without losing access to any content, and we actually expanded our access by purchasing electronic archives with year-end money. This gave us the significant shelf space that we needed for the renovation that we're under right now, and then it let us see what we had. So this is our decision spreadsheet. The way the process worked was Carol and I would go down to the basement in the summer. We would block off several mornings a week, and she'd bring her laptop, she'd set up in the aisle, I'd be in the stacks, and she pulled a master shelf list of our journals, which turned out to be horribly, horribly inaccurate. She would call out things to me, Academy of Management Journal, 1926 to 1976, and I would be like, nope. And we'd have this argument back and forth, and then we would realize that our catalog was actually woefully out of date. So she would at first pepper Anna with emails, ping, 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 email from the basement, and our cataloger. And we realized that was a very inefficient system. So what you can barely see here on the left is our ultimate decision spreadsheet that is much less color-coded than it was initially. Carol loves color. She's a knitter, so she had every line colored. Anna convinced her maybe that wasn't optimal. But this, like you've heard before, keeps track of not just what we have and what we've kept, but also what we've gotten rid of and why we made those decisions. So that going forward, if we lose some institutional knowledge because people eventually do decide to retire, we have an awareness of why we kept the titles that we kept. The right is our overlap spreadsheet. This is Anna's doing in her magic that she works on the back end. And we can see, we were really bad, it turned out, at pulling JSTOR titles. When we would buy these new packages, we wouldn't pull them. So we needed to have some way of seeing what we could easily get rid of. At first, we were really snobbish. We would say well, we own JSTOR, so we know that's a good platform. But if it's in EBSCO and ProQuest, I don't know, is that really enough? By the end, we've realized that any electronic access is really much, much better than the bound journal access. The last thing we did that we should have done up front, this would be my one piece of advice to you if you're starting on this kind of process, is we made a publisher decision tree. I say we, it was Anna and Carol. And it says, okay, JSTOR, we get rid of everything that we buy in JSTOR. If it's there, we're not having it in print. If it's Project Muse, we need to look at it a little differently. So we could go buy these big journal publishing packages, and we could make decisions wholesale as opposed to title by title, which is the way we did it initially. This print review it eventually merged with Anna's ongoing online journal review that I'm going to let her talk about now.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Anna Creech. I'm at the University of Richmond. So in addition to our print journal review, we've had a look at our online journal subscriptions, and these are primarily the things that are in our, not in our big packages. So it's a very small subset of our overall journals, and it includes some of the print journals as well. So when we're looking at all of this, we're kind of assessing what we want to do with these things. So I'm pulling in things like your typical stuff of usage and cost per use and trends over time to kind of help identify some of the low-hanging fruit in that area that I think our folks really need to pay attention to. And the criteria evolves over time as well. It's also not something that's very easy to do on an annual basis because the data sources don't always have good match points, and it takes a bit of time. So we're kind of moving to more of a 2 or 3 year cycle on these. And that also works really well for us as a small liberal arts undergrad, because a lot of times things aren't taught more than every 2 or 3 years. And that's reflected a lot in our usage as well. It's really important for us to make sure that our collection is directly relevant to the existing curriculum. And with journals, you end up having a lot of legacy reflection of what your institution taught in the past. And we want to stay as nimble as we can for the future. I will say, do your best if you're going to do something like this to think about who the end user is and how much data they actually want to be seeing. You're seeing right now more of a full view of this spreadsheet. I probably would hide the year by year stuff and only show them the summary. Nobody wants to look at that many data points, at least not among our selectors. I do, but they don't necessarily need to see it. And let's see, I think that's everything I wanted to say about that. So we can look at cost per use as a way of kind of identifying some of the online journals that we want to really pay attention to. But for print, we have to look at some other metrics. It requires a lot more conversations with people, particularly now at this point where we're really kind of narrowing down to like the harder things to make decisions about. So every year we are going through things. We've gone, like Carol will start at the top of the list, work her way through, and then as soon as she's done with that, she goes right back to the beginning again. Additionally, because we have withdrawn that 50,000 plus volumes, we have a much more nimble collection that's a little bit easier for us to get back on top of things like making sure everything has an item record. We're guessing at how many volumes were withdrawn because we didn't have item records for all of them to be able to pull that data out of the system. So we're also making sure that the catalog records get updated. Most of these are the catalog records as they existed when we started that subscription, however long ago it was. We don't have a serials cataloger. We've never had a serials cataloger. I'm the closest thing to a serials cataloger, and I only did it for 3 years about almost 20 years ago. So it is what it is. But our head of metadata is doing a lot of professional development in that area. So the idea being that what we have left will be discoverable, we'll have more information, and we'll really know what's there, and we'll make future review processes easier. So I think that was, did I miss anything on it? That was everything? Okay, yeah. And that's it for us. So thank you.